Hey everybody, today we're going to work on drawing hands and feet. Um, One thing I want you to focus on is balancing structure with gesture. I'm going to talk a lot about that today, but going back and forth between those two things. But yeah, hands and feet. So we're starting out with proportions of the hand, dividing it in half. This is going to feel similar to the proportions of the head when we're doing portraits. We divide it in half and then we divide that half into thirds. We have that top third and then the 2/3 for the fingers, and then the thumb is going to be its own section of the hand, its own section of the palm over here. You can use this triangle shape to kind of carve that out and find the rest of the sections of the palm here. You can use your own hand for a reference for this part, although it's not as great as a model for the gesture part. I want you looking at other hands, or you can use a mirror for that. But for right now, you can look at your own hand. Okay, I'm going to draw this again, and I'm going to separate the fingers on this one. But I'll draw two just so you can see the proportions simply and then see the individual fingers. But I'm starting it the same way, carving out the different sections of the palm. Also, notice how the pinky is connecting to that left side of the palm there. It's also sort of its own section, a little bit separate from the three middle fingers. The pinky and the thumb, kind of similar to the foot, are doing slightly different jobs than the three middle fingers, so that's why you can group them together in that way. Although in the beginning right here, you do want to look at the fingers as a whole and sort of see the hand as if it's wearing mittens. Don't worry so much about individual fingers until you get the rest of these proportions laid out, and then start to carve out the individual fingers with the knuckles with the negative space between them. Use that negative space as a tool to see how the fingers are separated from each other. Again, use your own hand as a model for this. Next, I'm going to break up the planes on top of the palm here. That line in the middle is the ridge coming from the metacarpal bone of your middle finger, kind of running through the middle of your palm. It's sort of slightly raised at an apex here, as you'll see from this front view. I'm not including the fingers on this breakdown. You can see that base of the thumb triangle on the side there, but it's just to show from a front view that the palm is naturally kind of curved because it wants to hold things. It's rare that your hand is spread open in the way that we just drew it. So I just want you to be aware of how the palm is sort of curved and is sort of ridged like a rooftop towards the middle finger. And here I'm just breaking down the proportions once more on that second hand, just so you can see it in relation to the individual fingers. So now I'm doing gestures for the hands. So just like we're going to do with the figure, we're starting with loose lines to kind of find the form of the hand. And I want you to think of the hand as a continuation of the arm, especially down through the wrist and through the middle three fingers. This gesture's a continuation of everything that the arm is doing. But just like the head or the arms or legs or any individual part of the body, it's going to have gesture of its own. And it's also going to be part of the overall gesture of the figure, depending on how you're drawing it. The trick is to balance the structure and the gesture at the same time because they do sort of counter each other. The more that you focus on the structure, the more it's going to take away from the gesture. So I'm really focusing on this downward slope of the whole hand, kind of pouring down off of the wrist, but I'm trying to give the wrist some perspective here and some rigidity. I'm also introducing some light and shadow just so you can see the different planes that I'm looking at here. And like I said before, I'm grouping the fingers together first and then going in and separating them with negative space, rather than starting with drawing individual fingers themselves. And I'm going to use these arrows just to show the gestures, just like I do with the figures in class. So again, I have my two gesture lines here kind of forming each side of the hand, and then I'm going to find the top and bottom. Since I know I'm just drawing a hand right here, I want to know where my drawing is going to begin and end, just like any portrait or figure that I'm going to be drawing. This hand's going in the other direction though, so the wrist is going to be on the bottom. And again, I find that gesture first, and then I start lining up the structure. Pay close attention to the ulna here. The ulna is going to be on the right side of this wrist. So if it's your right hand, it's on the right side of your wrist. If your thumb is on the left, the ulna is going to be on the outside, connecting up to your elbow. It's the same bone. It's that bump you feel on the outside of your wrist there. So that's that corner closest to us right here. I'm also trying to balance the hard structure, the harder edges of the knuckles, with the softer, fleshier parts of the hands on the underside of the fingers. If you look at your hand and feel the top of your hand, it's a lot bonier and has more rigidness than the bottom, softer part of your hand. Use that with your edges. Be aware of how you're controlling your edges with the harder or soft gradients and lines. So here too, you can see the middle three fingers are sort of grouped together, and I have the pinky off by itself. You can't see the thumb, but that, again, that's its own separate part. Those middle three fingers are the continuation of the arm all the way through. And again, I recommend looking at a model or using your own hand in a mirror for these drawings. It can be helpful to look at your own hand while you're drawing these, but it's rare that you're going to be drawing a person and see a view similar to the way you'd look at your own hand. This gesture is a little more complicated. This hand is going to be resting on an edge and sort of spread apart. So I'm still just blocking in those looser forms, and then I'm going to start to find the wrist and the four corners of the forearm and how they're connecting to the top of the palm and moving down through the knuckles. Those four corners are going to give your wrist perspective. On this gesture, I'm really pushing that distance between the thumb and the rest of the fingers. It's really being spread apart, and you can see the skin being stretched out between them. Again, the knuckles are going to be good, rigid, bony landmarks of the skeleton that you can use some harsher lines to kind of carve out. Use your softer lines on the softer, fleshier parts of the underside of the fingers. Remember, it takes practice, but a well-designed absence of information is just as important as what you are drawing. So pay as much attention to what I'm leaving out, what I'm not drawing, as what I'm actually putting in here. Different things like wrinkles on the skin of the knuckles and stuff like that, it's not as important as some of the other stuff I'm putting down here, at least right now. For this last one, the hand is going to be closed just so you can see the knuckles being pushed out a little more, and the thumb is still spread apart from the rest of the hand here, being stretched out. But use your gesture, find the rigid structure in the wrist, and find those four corners. And then divide the hand in half between the palm and the rest of the fingers. And remember, try to move general to specific, light to dark, and soft to hard edges. Especially if you're using a pencil. Feel free to erase if you're building up some form, building up some light and dark. And try and be intentional about your line weight to show what the form is doing. And the wrist is being compressed here on the top of the palm where it's meeting the forearm. Okay, so for the foot, just like I draw in class, when we do our initial gesture drawing, I'm really concerned about how the foot is meeting the ground and supporting the rest of the figure. And I have the back of the heel and the top and front of the foot there. I'm going to break it down again right here with using these 3D shapes, starting off with this cone for the heel and then a sphere for the ball of the foot. You don't actually really have to draw these in this way right now. I just want you to have this idea in your head. This next one's going to be sort of a 3/4 view from the front. I've started with the same initial triangle shape I did on the first one, but it's a lot lighter right here. And then I'm adding in a sphere for the ankle, just to kind of show how the leg bones are meeting up with the ankle. I'll talk more about the ankle bones in a bit, but for now just think of it as a wrench kind of fitting, a wrench shape kind of fitting over this sphere. Here I'm adding in a cube shape for the heel just to give it perspective. It's going to look a little bit robotic, and I'm giving it a little bit of extra space, kind of stretching out the heel so you can see it. It kind of looks like this robot skeleton's wearing high heels, but just bear with my drawing for right now. I want you to see all these different shapes as separate pieces that we're going to put together once we get into our gestures. Okay, so back to the ankle real quick. Again, think about this wrench shape fitting around this sphere. It's your two leg bones coming together, meeting the foot. Remember, the tibia is going to be on the inside, and it's going to be slightly higher than the fibula on the outside. So if you're looking down at your right ankle, the tibia is on the left side. That's the same bone that comes all the way up to be that ridge of your knee. The fibula is the smaller bone on the outside, on the right side of your right foot. That ankle bone is going to be slightly lower. They're not exactly horizontal. They've got that little bit of a tilt, which is what that arrow there is indicating. And so here's a back 3/4 view of a similar idea. I've started out with the same gesture, but I'm using that cube shape and the sphere on top for the ankle. Adding in my ankle bones here. On this one, I'm going to include the Achilles tendon. It's the tendon that's stretching all the way down, grabbing onto your heel bone at the bottom of your foot. You can reach down in your own foot and grab it. It's that tendon right above your heel, above where your foot's meeting the ground, that's going up and meeting your calf muscles. But that's what that stretched out rectangle is right there in front of the sphere of the ankle. So this would be the right foot. That's the tibia on the inside edge, and the fibula on the outside a little bit lower. And just like the hand, inspect your own feet as you follow along with this. Pause the video if you want and find these landmarks. And I'm starting to connect that front ball of the foot with the back heel, creating that arch in the middle. And then the toes are their own entity out in front, just like with the hand. I didn't go over the toes in that last drawing there. I'll talk more about them once we get into the gestures. Again, this is a really fast overview, and this is not actual anatomy. It's simplified design just to kind of give us an idea of what we're dealing with, what we're drawing, what we're looking at on a person. So for my foot gesture, I'm approaching it in a similar way to the hands, kind of finding each side and then finding that angle of the ankle, just like I would with the wrist or just like I would with the hips and the pelvis for a full figure. So here you can see I'm separating the middle toes just like I would with the middle fingers of the hand, and I have the big toe and pinky toe as being separate. That's why it's a lot easier to move your pinky toe around than your middle toes, because you use your pinky toe to balance a lot. I have all of my toes, so I don't know for sure, but I've heard from someone missing their pinky toe that it's actually hard to balance without one. So don't underestimate your pinky toe. But again, I'm grouping them together here, and then I'm carving out the negative space between them rather than going in and drawing each individual toe. That's not as necessary as the rest of this structure we're building up. You'll get there eventually in your drawing, but I want you to find these foundational things first. Remember that inside ankle bone is going to be higher. Here's one more foot gesture. You kind of see the back of the heel and see under the foot a little bit and how it's going to kind of twist around. So look for those corners and use them for perspective, and then know when to round them out when you need to. There's a lot of padding on the bottom of our feet, so there's going to be a lot of softer edges and a lot more form shadows. A great book to look at that explains a lot of this in a lot more detail is called Figure Drawing, Design and Invention by Michael Hampton. It's a good book for sort of bridging the gap between harsh anatomy and really nice gesture drawing and using these simple shapes to break down all these different forms. Remember that every part of the figure is serving a purpose. Be aware of that purpose when you're drawing it. What does the foot do? It supports, stabilizes, it walks, runs, jumps, pushes. When you're looking at a foot and drawing it, think about what it's doing, what's happening. Okay, so let's review. Be aware of how you're breaking up the planes of the hands and your proportions. Be aware of your gesture and balancing that with the structure that you've built underneath it. Same with the foot. Try to understand how it's built and how all these pieces fit together, and then you can try to start to understand what it's doing and how it's reacting to the world and how it's being used, just like everything else we're doing with the figure. That's it. Ollie, did you learn anything today? Did you learn anything? Okay.